Now, just as a reminder, my name's Clinton Thomas. I'm a member of the management team, the UK management team at the ICEO. And we're fortunate enough today to have this group of panelists with us, who I will introduce to you shortly. We have an exceptional team that we pulled together for you today. And we hope to give you what promises to be a really enlightening discussion on the topic of breakthrough moments in leadership. And I think as senior business leaders, I'm sure you have a lot of challenges, and this is all about talking about those challenges and how you can have breakthrough moments in those challenges. So, without any further ado, I'd just like to kick off by introducing everybody that we have here today, and it's probably easier if I start with the person next to me, which is Gary Browning.
Hi.
So Gary is a former CEO, and I think we mentioned earlier, he's actually the former CEO of Penna, which was this organisation before we became LHH. Gary is, in addition to being a former CEO, is a non-executive director, and chairman, I should say, not director. He's a chairman of a number of companies, all in the human capital services sector. Next to Gary, we have Nick Powell. Nick is the former president and CEO of Edgewell, which is a listed company on the New York Stock Exchange. They are responsible for lots of different brands, which Nick will expand on, for personal care, many of which I'm sure some of you will use, even though you've probably never heard of Edgewell. Huge company. Nick is also serving as a non-executive director and mentor. And we have, next to Nick, we have Ali Sparks, who is our global head of human resources at the LHH, our organisation. So Ali here today is here today to give us the HR view from a HR perspective, which of course is very important in this topic that we're talking about today. And finally, and by no means least, because he has a lot of credits for his names, is Dr. David Cooper. Dr. David Cooper is a chartered psychologist and chartered accountant. He's an author. He's a professor. Have I missed anything, David?
That's pretty good. Yeah.
And he specialises in guiding leaders through turbulence and uncertainty. So, yeah, really interested to hear what this diverse panel of individuals that we have here today have got to say. And, of course, we'll have a Q&A at the end as well. So, we're going to get straight into it. And Gary, you're up first.
Oh.
So I want to ask you, Gary, about recognising and embracing paradigm shifts. So in your experience as a non-executive director, chairman, you've got a bird's eye view of organisations, and I know you work with the private equity sector as well, so you probably have a great view of organisations in some very challenging scenarios. So what do you see as some of the major paradigm shifts that leaders need to recognise today, and how do you suggest leaders identify these moments before they become challenges?
Right, thank you. How long have we got?
2 minutes to be precise.
I can't think of a more interesting time to be talking about paradigm shifts in leadership in the workplace, because, as some of our speakers earlier on this afternoon said, we are going through unprecedented levels of change, and that change is speeding up. And I think there's far more to come in the not too distant future, I suspect. So, I mean, it's impossible not to talk about paradigm shifts without talking about technology, and there's been lots of that this afternoon. But that's clearly a major issue for boards and leaders to think about the impact on their business of technology. I think hybrid working's been talked a lot about. And we've heard some views today. I think all I would say is that genie is out of the box. I'm not sure it's going to be easy to get it back in again. And that has an impact on leadership. How leaders lead, the style with which they lead, needs to be thought through very carefully. And I think it goes slightly deeper anyway than whether people work remotely or in the office. I think there's a whole bunch of shift going on around attitudes and approaches to work across the generations, and we need to think about that in the workplace. That, coupled with the fact that we are currently, as was mentioned, in another war for talent. We're seeing one of the greatest distortions of supply-demand in the workplace that we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. There's definitely a shift in power, in my view, from employers to employees. So how do we address that as business leaders and as CEOs and as boards? There's a lot going on there. I think leaders probably need to take a broader perspective than just thinking about shareholder primacy, and start thinking about stakeholder capitalism and everything that includes. So that's a major shift in thinking. Specifically, you mentioned private equity. I do all of my work now in the private equity sector. I chair 4 private equity boards. I've done it on listed as well, but I've chosen to go down the private equity route. And I've noticed, really interesting actually, a major shift for leaders when there's a change of ownership construct. Yeah. So specifically when a company goes from being either listed or privately owned into a private equity model. And if the leadership team goes with that move, as often they do, and the CEO goes with it, there is a major shift. Everything changes. The role should be called something different, frankly. Specifically, if you were chief executive of a listed or AIM or large private company, and suddenly you find yourself in the hands of private equity, the agenda changes, the risk profile changes, timing changes, the end result changes, the way you're supposed to manage, transparency changes, everything changes. And I have witnessed time and again leaders not ready for that change and getting tripped up. And I think, I'm not going to plug your services here because it's not my job, but I do believe there is a case for greater education, awareness, mentoring, coaching, and general development for top teams and specifically CEOs when they're going from one ownership construct into private equity specifically. I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and I think that's a major shift people need to address.
Thank you, Gary. That's good. Some really good points there. Nick, can we ask you a question? So on the same topic, but as a former president and now an advisor and mentor, what signs indicate to you that a leadership approach needs to shift, especially in established organizations?
Well, as we've heard earlier, and Gary's just emphasised as well, there's a lot of change. I think there's always been a lot of change. We're just getting it in different shapes and sizes now. And for me, the key signs that would come through, some of the obvious ones, you'd see a change or a shift in team engagement. If that starts falling away, that's a big warning sign. Customer satisfaction. Again, the example from Kevin on that issue for Porsche, where customer satisfaction would be so key, but if that's falling away, and then the obvious one that we all experience, but it's not to be dismissed, is financial and wider company performance as being an obvious sign. I'm going to dig a little bit more into that more tangible one because, again, I'll build on what Kevin said earlier this morning. When internally, quite a lot of our objectives get set, and we tend to do it on an incremental basis of previous years, and we just, what's good for us? What can we add on to what we have maybe looked at before? And actually, something for me that often calls about that true paradigm shift and a real change of gears being required is when it's not about just looking internally for your objective measures, but are you spotting that stuff's going on in the industry or in the wider market? It may even be in different product sectors or categories, but it's still bringing big warning signs that can have an impact on your business later. So it's keeping a clear eye on what else could affect your business and what should you be doing for that. So for me, as you just mentioned, Clinton, I don't expect anybody in the room to necessarily have heard of Edgewell. It's a holding company based in the US, but hopefully you'll be familiar with some of the brands. So Wilkinson Sword, Hawaiian Tropic, Banana Boat, a whole load of different personal care brands, including ones that we purchased along the way, some more newer brands like Bulldog Grooming in the UK. And they're part of the shift that we had to go through. We actually had to change our portfolio in response to some of these markers. So quite a few years ago, with the emergence of online and direct-to-consumer, we saw it very directly. You'll have seen those examples in shaving where Dollar Shave Club or Harry's were coming on. Now, initially, their impact on our business was kind of under the radar because you couldn't measure online sales that clearly, and they weren't that big that they were really sucking massive amounts of the market away, but they were going to have a big impact on our market. Yeah. So that was a signal to us that we would need to shift our leadership approach. And it was empowering the team to actually start doing things that may not be serving our short-term internal financial goals, but would be there to boost the competitiveness and the ability of the organization later on. And it was seeing that scale of change that the leadership challenge, and again, I go to that point that leaders are all the way through the business. How do you help people and free them up to start making decisions that will respond better to that, quick changing consumer market dynamic? So hopefully that goes some way to address the question.
Well, I think what we're seeing here is there are some really detailed answers to some of these questions because it's a huge challenge. But thank you, Nick. Thank you, Gary, for those. So just shifting gears slightly and shifting to you for the next question, David. So developing agility and resilience in leadership styles is the next thing we want to talk about. So David, for you, from a psychological perspective, what mental shifts can help leaders adapt their approaches in challenging high-stakes environments?
So look, I think there are two fundamental shifts, and one way to frame these is there's an acronym which has been coined, which is supposed to sort of characterize this new paradigm, BANI. Has anyone?
Yes, I saw that.
Couple of people have heard it. So it stands for brittle, because things which we've taken for granted can suddenly collapse. That wasn't me. That's not. I hope nothing's collapsing.
That was the AI bot, David. Don't worry.
A stands for anxious, because these high levels of uncertainty trigger high levels of anxiety and emotion. N is non-linear, so things can suddenly escalate in unpredictable, irreversible ways. And the I is probably the most pessimistic of all, is incomprehensible. So as a psychologist, I just want to talk about the A and the I. So I think for leaders, it is important to recognize the emotional reactions which are triggered here. It is normal, natural. It's a mammalian reaction to become anxious when things are uncertain. But do not let that, bleed out and infect other people. So holding that anxiety. And the other thing, another common reaction when leaders become anxious is to double down and work even harder and get everybody else to work hard. That is not the right way to go. So that's how to manage the A. In terms of the incomprehensible, I think it is comprehensible, but you need to lead in a different way. And it requires a much more collaborative, consultative form. It is not a time for command and control. Nobody has the answers, but you can work together to find the answers and make sense. So those would be my suggestions.
Thank you, David. So, Ali, I want to shift to you under the same topic of agility and resilience. So you're a leader, HR leader in a global organization, LHH. So building consistent agility and resilience across teams can be challenging because there's different cultures, different locations, all of that in the mix. How do organizations sustain these qualities in leadership on a global scale?
So I'm going to plagiarize a little bit from Kevin because I really do think it's around clarity and connections. In LHH, over the last 2.5, 3 years, we've gone through considerable reorganization and restructuring, which I think some of my colleagues can probably shake their head on. Yes. And we took a number of different businesses, different brands, and different service lines, and put that all under the umbrella of LHH. So it was a big, big change for our organization. Again, you can probably nod.
I can nod, yes.
And to do that right, because obviously people feel anxious, and we need our leaders, we need our people to be resilient during those times of change. But globally, we've got to have clarity on our strategy, which we worked on very deliberately in the beginning. And then there was clarity on our org design. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we create an organizational design that connects with our strategy. And that's not easy work when you're talking about thousands and thousands of people in in 60 different countries. That can get a little complicated, but we had to make sure that we had the clarity, because this wasn't just a little reorganization. This was changing how we work. It's changing our teams. It's changing how we go to market. So we needed that clarity so people didn't become anxious during this change. The other piece that we focused on was around culture. We were a new organization now, so it's our job as leaders to really think about the kind of culture that we want to create. So we spent a lot of time on that, and that hits both that clarity and the connection piece. How do we work together? How do we want people to experience every day? Going with the connection and the clarity, it's also about communication. And communicate. And it's not just about updates, but it's about collective conversations. So we spent a lot of time doing global town halls that weren't just virtual, but bringing teams together so that they can experience those messages and then talk about it afterwards. The other piece that's been important for us is around coaching. One of our brands under LHH is Ezra, and this is around democratizing coaching and giving coaching to all. And we've focused on our leadership levels so that when we talk about agility and resilience, they have someone that they can talk through these things with. So I think at the end of the day, agility, resilience, it's not just a one-time thing. It is about practice. It's about putting the right tools in place. It's about talking about it. But I think if there's two main things, it is that clarity and the connection piece.
Excellent connection. Thank you very much. Very
Thank
detailed response. Appreciate that. So, Gary, on the same topic, resilience and agility. Agility is a critical trait in modern leadership. How have you observed agile approaches driving impact at the board level?
Yeah, well, I mean, building on Ali's point, really, I think if agility was ever a choice, it certainly isn't now. It's an essential quality of leadership.
Absolutely.
You know, the speed we're moving at, unless you're agile and able to adapt and move, I think you're going to have difficulty. It's interesting, but we talk a lot more about agility since the pandemic than before, and it was an emerging theme anyway for a long time. But there's an interesting thing about pandemics. If you go back over time and look at all of them, they all have an accelerating impact on certain themes that were occurring in society and the workplace over time. The whole health profession came out of the pandemics of the Middle Ages. And I think agility is one such example, along with things like DE&I, ESG, risk. All of those things were, of course, being discussed in the workplace pre-pandemic, but they seem to have accelerated through it, particularly diversity agenda. And agility, I think, is a good example. I had a great example of an agile situation during the first lockdown. This is my own story because it happened to me. My next door neighbour is the CIO of a 250 FTSE organisation. And he told me at the end of the first lockdown over the garden fence that he'd had to implement Teams through necessity across 40,000 people, 6 continents, in 48 hours. And he said, wow. In the old world, Gary, he said, I'd have had to go through risk conflict, compliance, governance. I would not have done it in under 6 months. He said, I guarantee you, it would have taken maybe 9. He said, we all know Teams is a non-intrusive technology. Nevertheless, it would have taken me 6 months, and we rolled it out, 40,000 people, 6 continents, in 48 hours. And I hope we don't lose all the lessons that we might have learned in that period of time. Lots of rubbish happened, of course, but you know, this concept of pivoting, which then came out, that was in the hospitality sector, and how they agilely moved into a whole new delivery mechanism was a brilliant example of how powerful agile thinking is. I mean, I think boards have got some work to do. There are still too many boards, in my opinion, in the UK that are too conservative. And I think the opposite to agile is risk. And there's still too much risk aversion sometimes. So I think there's a polarization of people. Their thoughts either go, I love agile environments, and I've got a 30-year-old son who has got a senior role with Deliveroo, which is extraordinarily agile, and he loves it. But I also know people, perhaps of my era, my age, and this is not an ageist thing, sounds like it, who are very concerned about the concept of taking more risk than we used to move faster. Yeah. But I think that's where the boards have to think. It's okay to take some risk, as long as it's measured, as long as it's managed, if it means you're more agile.
Yeah, and I think AI is a perfect example of that. And Adrian gave us his model earlier in terms of the governance, and all of that is very important. But actually, everything is moving so fast, you have to figure out a way to keep up with it.
Yeah.
And we're still figuring that out. Thank you for the answers to those. So, Nick, can we turn to you again? So we're talking about, and Gary, you've kind of led us to this quite neatly. So these are challenges, but actually on the back of every challenge, of course, there's an opportunity. So reframing challenges as opportunities requires strong strategic vision and a lot of confidence by what we've said there. But what qualities do you observe in leaders who successfully turn challenges into growth opportunities?
Well, I'm glad this has come up because it was covered earlier as well when we were talking about challenges, that sometimes they're the most memorable and, in hindsight, the fun parts of what we get to do. And sometimes we sort of always assume it's negative, and it often isn't. Personally, I look back and I've really enjoyed those elements where you've got the challenges, those things that haven't got an answer yet, but then getting to an answer with the team is the bit that gets exciting. So, couple of examples which I'll give as context for me, but a company prior to Edgewell for me was Energizer Batteries. And good competition globally. Here in the UK, relatively small Energizer versus a big Duracell. And then finding that P&G have bought them, so they've come with a bit more marketing might to put behind it as well. And I'm going to steal, I think it was Kevin that had that phrase, so I'm going to steal it, which is, you can't outspend the competition, but you can outthink them. And I didn't use exactly those words, but I had to use that sentiment, which is, come on guys, we've got to find a way of turning this back round and using that massive investment to turn back and help us. And we found ways of doing that. I haven't got time here to go into it, but we found ways of doing it. And then the other shift that I saw on the shaving side, and I'm looking around the room, and there aren't too many what I would call offenders here today, but with the challenge of beards coming through, it completely changed the dynamic for a shaving company where we were losing too much. Yeah, I can see a couple. We were losing a big chunk of our market. So actually, that's a challenge. How do you respond to it, and how do you turn that on its head and find a way of growing through it? So what did I see? I'm reflecting on those great people and leaders that I saw, and what did they bring through? And I think there's a few characteristics that link them. First off, it's not blind optimism. It's not the idiot in the corner who just goes, don't worry, it'll all be fine. That doesn't help at all. In fact, it tends to panic people even more. But actually, it's those that have got that deep inbuilt appetite for problem solving. They're the ones that get a buzz from, great, I've got something here, I can really get my teeth into it, and we can get our teeth into it. And it seems to catalyse and spark their energy and their curiosity to then keep digging until they can get something that's going to come good from this. So that'll be the first element, which is really around the curiosity that comes through. The very best people were also really good at making sure that they don't keep the challenge to themselves. They don't just internalize it and think, oh, crikey, I'm the leader. I've got to come up with a really bright answer, otherwise they're going to think I'm thick. It's actually those that really take it out to the organization. They identify those people across the organization who probably can contribute to the solution. And actually, from that, they create an environment where they can be creative. And again, that word create came up earlier on, but create the confidence and energy and the fun around the team getting involved in creating solutions as well. And you really can get a good vibe coming, even while you haven't started coming out of the problem yet. You're still working on the solutions. You can get the energy back in the room by getting the right people involved in that discussion. And give them the space to create lots of solutions, and then the backing to start throwing the daft ones out and picking those that can actually take you forward as well. But you've got to come up with a long list first. And I think Kevin used those two boards of going through it. Whatever your mechanic is, let those ideas come through and then whittle them down to those that can have most impact. And then another key attribute, and this for me is really key, and it's where the energy comes back into the organization, which is even whilst you're designing your response to the challenge, you're actually thinking, where are our recovery points? What are those things that we will be able to measure as successes? And we call them out at the beginning, and we get some early days tangible results that we'll be able to call out, and we celebrate like crazy when we start crashing through them and when we start hitting them. And we're honest about those that we're not hitting, but we really celebrate the ones that are coming through and are helping. And that's what brings the energy back in, because I would imagine most of us here have experienced it. You'll have been in an organization that feels that those challenges, that we're the victims and we're being hurt, and takes the energy away from the organization. So how do you get the success, the feeling of success, and momentum to come back in? And every single time, it's self-perpetuating. I've never known it in a turnaround situation where that doesn't get the energy back in, and for people to be driving and cooperating. That sort of, it leads to true collaboration when people are celebrating together.
Thank you, Nick. Lots of great stuff you just said there. And what's standing out to me really is that the example you gave around the competition got bought by someone bigger, they could spend a huge amount more money. And then you made the solution sound really easy, and so did Kevin earlier, right? But the reality is, and just flicking that on to David, I mean, how can leaders use psychological insights to reframe setbacks as opportunities for growth, both for themselves and for their teams? Because it can't be easy for the CEO to get the news your biggest competitor has just been bought by your even bigger competitor, and how do you frame that into a positive?
Not easy at all. So I think the secret here is be prepared, lay some foundations. So first of all, if you cultivate the discipline of strategic foresight, so at the moment nobody can predict what is going to happen, but it is possible to get better at foreseeing what is on the horizon, what are the emerging themes. And if you get really good at spotting the faint signs, you can be far quicker to adapt in light of setbacks. If you spot them sooner, if you've done a bit of preparatory thinking about how you might deal with different scenarios, it's way preferable to be solving the problem when it's on top of you. So give yourself a little bit of psychological space. Even more important than that, I think from a psychological point of view, is to create, and it's probably more important now than ever before, to really create an atmosphere and a culture of psychological safety. So the way that setbacks can really blow businesses out of the water is if they trigger a cycle of blame and defensiveness. So if leaders are spending half their time trying to prove, it's not my fault, a total waste of energy and attention. And energy and attention are probably the two most important psychological resources which leaders have. So be constructive, make it all right. These are opportunities. But you do need to set all of this up in advance.
And how do you do that?
You use HR.
Well, that leads us very neatly. Thank you. Simply, what role does HR play in supporting the leaders through this?
I really didn't mean to do that just then.
Worked really well.
How can HR support the leaders to turn those challenges into great breakthrough moments for them and for their team to drive growth?
Really, that's exactly what I was thinking as you were talking about that, because HR really needs to be that strategic partner that can be a sparring partner, but also then they are the ones who should then go and create the infrastructure, the tools, etc., to be able to get the leaders ahead of things. So when I think about earlier when we were talking about coaching, if it's around our leaders, they really need a place and someone to help guide. It's HR's responsibility, I think, to then take that and look for proper solutions. When we talk about tools and infrastructure, at LHH we use Peakon as our engagement survey, and it is a powerful, powerful tool for our leaders and managers so that they can get ahead of issues that they might not be aware of, because they can see the insights in their teams in real time, spot any issues, and get ahead of that. I think there's also a piece around that psychological safety that HR has a responsibility to play, that if we recognize that there isn't that culture, it's about having the brave conversations with the leaders to say we need to do something about it. So I think HR needs to be the strategic partner. We've got to help with the tools, et cetera, put it in the hands of the leaders and managers. And we've got to be the eyes and ears and have the trust and respect of the business to be able to have tough conversations and help come up with fantastic solutions.
Can I just add one? I think there's another absolutely crucial role for HR, which is to do with how leaders are evaluated. So this is not a time to evaluate leaders based on the outcomes and results. It's very much to do with behavior and a multi-dimensional sort of competency framework. So being really careful about what leaders are rewarded for and where there are penalties for bad behavior.
I spent hours last week on that very conversation. Just FYI, LHH colleagues, we will be changing your performance management tools just next year.
She's going off script now. Look forward to seeing that, Ali. No, I kid you not. I think just sticking with this topic as well, these are high-stakes situations, and I think, Gary, this one is for you. So we've talked a bit about coaching today, and we know that that's a bit of a journey we can take people on. But when somebody's facing an issue right now and they need quick decisions, do you think mentoring has a role to play within that?
I do. I'm a big supporter of mentoring as much as coaching, and I think that's a great example of where it can add a lot of value.
And how do you see that can add value in those high stakes situations that have no time to fix them, to have a mentor who's been through that before potentially, rather than a coach who can help you to develop you through that? At the board level, I'm talking, this more senior people. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's exactly that, isn't it? I think mentoring is can be seen as a shortcut, a way of getting to an answer quicker than, I'm treading on dangerous ground here with a lot of coaches in the room, but perhaps quicker than a coaching intervention would. Yeah. I think coaching has huge value, and I do both. But I think mentoring is in a situation where you're looking for answers and you're looking to get to a solution quickly. I think mentoring has a role.
Thank you. I'll get back on script now. Achieving breakthrough moments, one for David and one for Nick. What advice would you give to leaders striving for breakthrough moments in today's complex environments? And we may have covered some of this already, but what advice would you give to leaders?
I think there'll be some overlap, as you say, with bits earlier. Firstly, it's a bit like a boiled kettle. I don't think you can necessarily make it happen or will it to happen to have a breakthrough moment. And nearly always, breakthrough moments are unannounced. They kind of come upon you when you might not be expecting them, or even you don't even know until after the event that was a breakthrough moment, that something has come along. So actually, rather than saying you'll never notice, I don't mean that. There clearly are breakthrough moments. But it's actually going back to that point about curiosity and that always looking for, well, how might this apply? How can I reinvent that? It came up earlier on today, which is you look at other industries, you transpose your business into how other businesses might be approaching the similar problem through a different lens, and nearly always it's going to throw up something that you can learn from it. So curiosity to say, where else can I learn from, or where else can the organisation learn from? So staying open and alert to wherever you might get something that's going to help with it. You can't predict who in the team either is going to come up with that breakthrough moment. Yeah. And never underestimate anybody. Never, it's some people are going to come up with an insight that can really change your organisation. So that openness really has to apply on a wider basis, and and make sure that's filtering through the organization, that people are listening to where those thoughts and ideas can come from, because you don't know who's nurturing the next big idea. So you want to create an environment where they feel confident with it coming through, and to encourage the organization to get creative. Again, I'll come back to that word, but think outside the box. Breakthrough moments don't necessarily happen by accident. Sometimes you've got to provoke them into coming through and having an impact on your business. So the creativity comes through in helping people address their challenges, and encouraging the leaders to nurture it in others. So when somebody comes up with something, build on it, rather than put it down, oh no, we tried that last year. It's like, well, why do you think that? Why do you think that's an opportunity? It's really helping. And once a few people are doing it, the whole organization knows that's how we respond to fresh thoughts and ideas. So it's not acceptable to just dampen them down. And create the headroom across the organization for risk-taking. It's the job of leaders to create the air cover for risk-taking, which kind of means, well, nobody's going to get slapped down for that. I know why you did it. I get it. It didn't work on this occasion, but thank you for at least raising it and trying to bring that through. However, there's a big caveat here, which is the best I've seen it work is when an organization feels confident to take risks, but there's enough transparency to say, by the way, I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to take a risk. So kind of give some warning signs to the organization that it might be a bit riskier, that it might fall over, it might have a problem, and you get more collaboration then. People won't try and prove you wrong. They'll try and tell you when it might be about to fail or fall over. And the last point, now I'll end on an example. And this wasn't me. I'm not saying credit for me. It was somebody in my team, and she came up with a brilliant idea, which she held a marketing summit globally across Edgewell. She got the best of our brains in marketing across the whole world, got them in a room, and the theme of this workshop was to share their failures.
Wow.
Now, I've only ever known marketing, and I'm a marketer, at core. I've only ever known forums to get the marketers together to tell you how brilliant they are and, all the things they got right. She made this the theme to share failures. The fun, but also the learning that came from that workshop is one of the best I've ever seen.
Wow.
So that's an example.
Well, there's one I'm sure a few of us will borrow as an idea. Thank you for that, Nick. I'm just going to jump to the next topic here. And you talk about trying different things, you talk about failing. Here's one you might want to think about how people might do, and I'll throw it at you, Gary, and you, Ali. So the statement here reads, Elon Musk recently argued that US government employees should return to a 5-day in-office schedule, suggesting that remote work may hinder government efficiency. So the question here is, in a corporate setting, and if anyone else has the answer to this problem, please tell us. In a corporate setting, how should leaders weigh the benefits of hybrid work against potential productivity or collaboration concerns? What steps can organizations take to maintain efficiency while offering flexibility that employees expect?
That's heavy.
Well, we talked about taking risks. We talked about agility. We talked about workshops on failure. So what would we try here? Think of this as an ideas session.
Garrett, we had a great conversation about this the other day, and I think some of the things that you talked about, because there's so much around, prescriptive 2 days, 3 days, and I think the points that you made, I think would be fantastic for the group. There we go. Over to you.
Thank you.
Well shifted.
If you can remember them, that would be great.
By the way, Ali now wins the prize for one, the best segue, and secondly, the best handoff.
You like that? That
was quite impressive.
This is such a tough topic. We were actually talking about it today on the walk over here with other LHH colleagues, and I was saying how years and years ago, before COVID, I was such a proponent for flexible working. It doesn't matter. Presenteeism shouldn't matter. It's all about productivity. And if you can be productive sitting behind your computer, well done you. Don't come to the office. And I felt very strongly. COVID happens, and I said, yep, told you. I was little Miss Smarty Pants, and we proved that was true. Yeah. But now we have a mental health crisis. Yeah. And now I feel completely different than I did before.
Yep.
And I feel very strongly, based on the walk that I just had here with my colleagues, the conversation that we had in that 15 minutes was unlike any conversation I would have on a Teams meeting that was scheduled with an agenda that I clicked join and I hit leave. There is a problem with that.
Yep.
There's a real problem with it. Yes, it's productive. Yes, we get a lot done. But we are humans, we are social creatures, and we need to be together. And that's where the creativity and the spark happens. So how we do that, this is where, Gary, you had some great ideas the other day.
Or if anyone else.
I was thinking about this question. By the way, I'm not going to give you an answer. but I think from a psychological point of view, I can offer you, I'd be interested in what you think. This is an idea on why it is so difficult, because there's significant consensus that it would be great if more people came back to work. So I mentioned that BANI, the non-linear, how something can happen and it has all kinds of unexpected consequences. One thing that I've been very interested in over the years is the psychology of happiness and the links between work and happiness. And as part of that, I look at what makes people unhappy. One of the biggest sources of unhappiness is your commute to work. And basically, for years and years, we just got used to, well, God, you just put up with it.
Yep.
You become inured to that commute. And particularly people living in London, it's a hell of a thing. And when you think about it, it's not a source of happiness. All of a sudden, there's a pandemic, and people don't have to do that anymore. And that contrast, you cannot unring that bell on a personal, subjective, happiness level experience of life. That genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah.
So saying, oh, great news, we're going to give everyone a bacon sandwich on Thursday morning, that really doesn't stack up.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you think of that. That was just an idea that I had about why, one of the reasons, I think it is an example of a non-reversible, non-linear progression.
Yeah. And in organizations like ours, where we have coaches, we have recruiters, that they can work remotely. So I think it depends on the job, it depends on the kind of work, and it depends on, bringing people together for the right things and making sure that those moments are collaboration, idea sharing, etc. Because there is no reason to commute for 2 hours to come into the office to sit behind a screen. So I think it's about creating those moments to bring people together as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know how things work in the American government. I haven't got the first idea. So Elon Musk may or may not be right. But I do think that if you're a CEO of an organization in this country and you suddenly go in on Monday and say everyone's back in the office 5 days a week, that's quite a brave thing to do. Yeah. Foolhardy thing to do. That genie is out of the bottle, and it's not going back anytime. And I've read as many research papers proving the case for increased productivity remotely working as I've read papers doing the opposite. And I think, okay, this is probably the biggest experiment in the workplace since Taylorism of the 19th century, but it's happening. And what I'd like to see, to your point, Ali, is I'd like to see the debate elevated, not to should people work 3 days a week, should it be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but actually a slightly more intelligent debate around where is the most appropriate environment to do a task. So the example I would give you is, I've got an accountant working for me, and we're at the budgeting cycle, we're at that time of year, and his team have done all the data collection, they've gone around talking to all the heads of functions, and his job now is to produce a thumping great Excel model that will take him 3 days on his own, in a room. It's a really mind-numbing task, but he has to do it. And we're going to ask him to come into the office on a train for an hour, to sit in an office on his own all day without talking to someone, to go home at the end of the day on the same train for an hour. That's kind of daft. On the other hand, I've got a marketing director, a marketing manager, who's creating a new campaign for a client, which involves a high degree of brainstorming, whiteboard thinking, lots of people. That task, I believe, is best served in the workplace. And, so it's not about even the role, it's about the task within the role and where that task is most productively, most efficiently performed.
Yeah.
And so therefore there's a case for both, I think. And it just feels like that's a more sensible, more intelligent process. And this isn't new. I mean, we've had work from home on Friday for years, haven't we? I mean, it's just the COVID again brought it to a head. And
I do think there's a risk with that, though, where, yes, there's some jobs that will be suited and other jobs less so, but you still need a culture to come together across the whole organisation, and you don't want these, closet aliens, who they're allowed to stay in a box at home.
which is why it's about tasks, not jobs, I think. So the same person could be doing certain tasks at home and certain tasks in the office. And I agree with you, culture and, what we all call them, the water cooler moments, learning on the job, absolutely critical.
Yeah.
I think this is a hot topic that we've hit on here. Definitely one to continue discussion over cocktails later. So I just want to say a huge thank you to our incredible panel for sharing your insights, your experiences. I think today's discussion has given us an awful lot to think about and given us some great insights as well. We've talked about recognising paradigm shifts and building resilience. We've talked about reframing challenges and opportunities. And what we've just discussed is a huge challenge, but there is obviously some great opportunity in there as well. So if anybody uncovers that, share it.
Yeah.
I don't even think AI's got the answer to that one. And on the topic of AI, before we go, I put these questions and asked AI to give me a good quote to leave us with. And what it came up with was, leadership is not about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions, embracing change, and inspiring those around you to rise to the occasion. And I think that's
Didn't
what
Kevin
we
say that earlier on?
Well,
I'm sure he used those exact words. He Googled.
Well, then maybe, that's what AI came up with. That's what ChatGPT came up with me today. So it's about, and I think you've all talked about that. It's about using the team. You haven't got all the answers as senior business leaders. It's about relying on the team. Not a profound insight, but one that we probably need to keep reminding ourselves about, especially when we haven't got the time to think things through. The answer is somewhere in the room.